What is up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Den of Geek presents Marvel Standom Live, where each week we give you the deepest possible dives on all the goings-on in the MCU, Marvel Comics, and beyond. With me for all time and always, I have Den of Geek TV editor Alec Bajalid. Don't worry, Den of Geek News and Features editor Kirsten Howard will be back with us next week. You can read her full spoiler-filled review of Moon Knight Episode 3 over on denofgeek.com right now. But we do have returning special guest this week, pop culture writer and Den of Geek contributor Joe George. Joe, welcome back to Marvel Standom.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for putting up with us once again.
My pleasure. Lots of fun.
So, of course, we are here talking about Moon Knight Episode 3, an episode where, well, you know, stuff happens. I'm not entirely sure I would classify this as an eventful episode or not, but we do learn more about the mysterious Layla. We meet another key character from Moon Knight comics. We finally get some like traditional action sequences. And there are some hints of another, yet to be revealed aspect of the Moon Knight personality. And we get a better sense of Arthur Harrow's history with Khonshu. We get a better idea of kind of what that relationship with Marc Spector is. We get a better idea of how Khonshu like literally uses Marc Spector and his avatars. And we get like kind of a cool representation of the wider cosmology of the MCU as it relates to the Egyptian pantheon. So, I just want to know, what did everybody think of this episode kind of generally? Joe, you were the voice of positivity last week. So I'm going to start with you once again.
I suspect I'm still more up on this episode than the rest of you, but I won't be arguing quite so hard. There are some issues in this episode, but there are enough things I like. I mean, we get to see more of the Marc Spector personality than we've seen so far. And Oscar Isaac being a cool, tough guy is always a good thing. So I'm all for that. So the weakest of the four that I've seen, but I still like it probably most than other people.
Oh, Alex making a face.
I knew that this was coming since I dreaded this episode date, just because I was very uninspired by this one, and to a lesser extent the next one. It's really so much of the issues with this, I think, come down to the aesthetic. It's just like they present you with this Tatooine-ass looking Egypt, which is just like kind of clearly shot on a soundstage somewhere, and it's just kind of uninspiring to look at. It puts you in a sarcophagus like dungeon underneath the Great Pyramid immediately. Aside from this one scene we're seeing now with Arthur, there's just very little natural lighting. It just kind of feels a bit like a filler. There's not much that really happens of consequence aside from the meeting of all the Egyptian gods, which I was a big fan of because I think it's well established in Marvel Standom lore. That I love administration and bureaucracy when it comes to my superhero stories. Yeah, but aside from that, there's just not that much that I found novel or interesting this time around. And it really, when you're watching them all back to back because you're afraid that the screeners are going to expire, this one really is a slog.
See, initially, this one was something of a relief for me. It was the first one where I kind of felt the vibe of the show because there was less Stephen Grant in this episode than the first two. And we finally kind of got more of the character vibe that we were expecting when Oscar Isaac was first cast in the role, right? And yes, I get it. And once again, I do kind of understand why they're deliberately playing him against type most of the time, because this is very much like Oscar Isaac doing a more traditional adventure hero, tough guy type character. There's a little Indiana Jones there. There's a little bit of Poe Dameron there, and I totally get that. But you know what? But that is what I want to see. And that is why you cast Oscar Isaac as a character like Marc Spector, who is supposed to be rough around the edges. Having less Stephen Grant was definitely a plus for me because Stephen Grant is absolutely the worst. Like, I have yet to decide whether I hate Stephen Grant more than I hate Party Thor from What If, but it's a close call as to which of these two guys is the worst. I like, I do appreciate, as Alec does, anytime you get into kind of the inner workings of the weirdness the weirdness behind the superheroics. And we do get that with the various avatars of the entire Aeneid there. Like, I thought that was cool. But then watching the episode a second time today, it is a little chaotic. And it is, I think my biggest problem with this show, other than Stephen Grant, it often feels like events are happening to characters rather than characters driving the actual action. The one exception, and this is another reason why I like this episode a little bit more than the first two, is with Layla. And this episode opens on Layla, and she is once again the best character on the show. And we start getting hints about her backstory here, and I'm fascinated. I even love the opening scene with the with the passport stuff. What did you think of Layla, and what's your impression of her now, Joe, now that we've gotten to know her a little bit better?
I'm right with you. I think she is probably the most exciting character on the show so far. She's I'm not familiar. I didn't watch Raimi, so I hadn't been familiar with this actress, but before this, but she's just charming every time she's on screen. I like the way that they're doling out her history, especially because this is just a diversion from what I thought is a pretty boring character in the comics. So I like where they're going with her here. And yeah, the more that she gets to do this sort of high adventure stuff, I'm all for that. I think it's a lot of fun.
She's definitely better than the character in the comics. For anyone who didn't tune in last week, Layla's basically the kind of the MCU version of a character named Marlene, who was much more traditional kind of love interest girlfriend type in the comics. Mm-hmm. And to the best of my knowledge, has never really been properly developed. I have not read as many Moon Knight comics probably as Joe, and certainly not as many as as Kirsty has. My impression of Marlene has always kind of just been, they've never taken that next step with the character, whereas Layla's already at that next level. And we know that Khonshu has his eye on Layla as a potential future avatar. So I'm just like, let's get to it. Like Oscar Isaac only signed a deal for one season so far. So let's get Stephen Grant out of here and put Layla in the raiment of Khonshu. You know what I mean? Alec, how about you?
Ever since you floated that the show could really be serious about introducing Layla as Moon Knight for a season 2, it's got me feeling impatient with her, because that would be so much cooler than how the character is presented now. And it's through no fault of the character or the actress. It's just that Moon Knight, by definition, he has so much going on that he sucks up a lot of oxygen from everything else around him. I just feel like the degree of difficulty for any actor acting opposite a character who is multiple personalities, both of them played by Oscar Isaac, and talking to an Egyptian god half the time, and occasionally turns into one of two superheroic entities as that god. It's just hard for Layla to not feel superfluous. I can't say that word. It's impossible. But yeah, I mean, no disrespect to the actress and no disrespect to the characterization. I too like that opening scene with the passport photos. It's kind of another bit of, bureaucracy behind the action that's to come. But yeah, my main complaint still stands. Just you're kind of fighting a losing battle when you try to build out any character opposite someone as dynamic in theory as Moon Knight.
Would that still be the case were the rest of the show less chaotic? Were there better balance between, say, the humor and the action, or perhaps most importantly, and this is a little problem that we get into, because we do learn more about her relationship with Marc, and we find out obviously their relationship has been troubled from the start, even though they're married, and he's been keeping all this stuff from her. Obviously she was not aware, at the very least, of the extent of his dissociative identity disorder. It's hard to connect with any of these characters when they're giving us all of this information in little drips and drabs here and there. And once again, I say, this is a character that, with everything else going on, as Alec just pointed out, really would have benefited from a traditional origin story. You know, even if we didn't necessarily spend a lot of time with Layla at the outset, and then she comes in as this character, like, hey, remember me, your wife? Like, this stuff might be, might land a little harder. I don't know.
That strikes me. I wonder if part of it is they're just afraid of opening with Marc Spector in full mercenary mode. They'd rather introduce to theoretically more appealing, kindly Stephen Grant as something that the audience is going to jump on board with than, I kill people for money, Marc Spector, before he begins his redemption arc. I think that's a bit of a missed opportunity. I think Disney is undervaluing how much people are bought into the MCU model. And I think they would have gone along and given them the benefit of doubt. But I understand from the aspect of trying to sell this concept to a larger audience, why they decided to go with the more likable personality. I don't know why I'm doing that. I like Stephen Grant a lot. I'm not with you guys on that. He's so delightful, but the more likable to other people personality than the rough edge murder man personality.
Although murder man.
But that does lead us to another aspect of the episode, right? Which is like early on in this, we get our first really traditional action sequence of the series. It took 3 episodes for us to get an action scene that is not, that is not like played for laughs, that is not that is not against like CGI weirdness or invisible monsters. It's pretty good. Like it's a pretty good action scene. But even as we see Marc Spector fighting here, there is a hint that they've sanded off the edges of Marc Spector a little bit more than you would expect, because in the comics, Marc Spector is not a good dude. And they really got into this even more in relatively recent Moon Knight comics, with like just how dirty and just how much red in the ledger there is for Marc Spector. It seems that on this show, they're trying to play that down a little bit. When it's Marc Spector fighting in that opening scene, he's mostly using like non-lethal, like pretty merciful techniques. And then suddenly something happens and all these guys are dead on the floor, which means there's another personality that's merging. Joe, as another Moon Knight comics reader, do you want to start with what this means?
Yeah. So traditionally, Moon Knight has 3 personalities. Marc Spector, the mercenary, Stephen Grant, which, as Kirsty has explained before, is kind of like the Bruce Wayne. That's how Marc Spector is funneling his riches as a mercenary into a personality that does good. And then the third one is Jake Lockley, a New York cabbie. And it serves the function of him having kind of his ear to the ground and has a rich supporting cast compared to the rest. But it tends to be kind of like the tough city guy and not necessarily super killer, what they're possibly hinting if that's where they're going with this. So we might have another divergence from the comic book version, but yeah, he usually has that third personality, which is Jake Lockley, the cabbie.
Alec, as a non-comics reader, is the idea of this third personality something that you were able to like grasp on the first viewing, or is this too opaque for people?
It's too opaque, I have to report, because I had no idea what you guys are talking about.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So in that opening scene, the way I interpreted it is that like he was flashing back and forth between Mark and Steven, and we just didn't get to see the Steven bits. Like Steven would occasionally try diplomacy, which is how at the end of the fight, like he ended up outside having not killed anybody and then came back in. So yeah, I didn't catch on at all with that. It is interesting though what you mentioned about this Jake fella, because it sounds like Stephen Grant on Moon Knight, the TV show, kind of fits a similar bill as Jake in the comics. Like they're both kind of working class men out down on the street, whereas Jake's in a cab and Stephen is just, in a museum gift shop.
Yeah.
So like it functions a little differently on that front, but it seems like those would be the two similar personalities. But I guess the show is going to go something wildly different with Jake.
It's funny you say that, because when the first trailer for Moon Knight hit and everybody was like, what is going on with Oscar Isaac's accent? Kirsty and I, and Kirsty keeps coming up because we miss you, Kirsty. Come back next week, please. Kirsty and I were talking about maybe that's Jake, maybe Jake on this show is like, I don't know, a chimney sweep or whatever that accent is supposed to be. But like, that was kind of the first place that our heads went when that trailer hit, So I am concerned because Alec, even though you're not a comics reader, you are an accomplished TV critic. You are like, you're a very smart guy who knows your stuff. And if you're not picking up on these cues where it's like suddenly these guys are dead and Steven and Mark are talking to each other in the reflection of the knife, which is aggravating. Like, and they're going, why did you do this? Well, I didn't do this. Well, I didn't do it either. You know what I mean? It's like, if viewers aren't picking up on that, that's a problem. And, it's just like another tick in the wrong column for this show, I have to say.
So to be fair, I don't know if everybody is watching the show binge style as I did and is as annoyed as I was with portions of that fight. Because that's when I first started going on my poor aesthetic tear when they're on the rooftop in Egypt. Because it looked, it might not be, but it looked green screeny to me. And maybe I just have my guard up from so many other Marvel properties. But I just couldn't stop thinking about that. So maybe other more attentive viewers would have picked up on that.
I was all in on the show when I was binging it the first time. And yeah, that rooftop scene, that's maybe the worst looking rooftop scene since like The Room, it's really, it's really jarring. So I was positive up until that point. It's bad.
Oof.
Oh, hi, Mark, with the Steve.
Exactly.
Merciless Joe George, ladies and gentlemen. I didn't notice it as much there because I was focusing on the fight scene because I love a good fight scene. But you know what else? Like, this is a good fight scene, but it's not as good as some of the action that we got on Hawkeye. And you know what? There hasn't been a single hand-to-hand combat scene on any of these Disney Plus Marvel shows nearly as good as half of the ones, if not more, that we saw on Daredevil. And I'm going to take it a step further. Arrow was doing better action scenes 5 years ago, like the stuff that James Bamford was coordinating and directing on Arrow, like still looks better than when we got here. And we know from videos that were being posted when Oscar first got the role, he trained hard for this. You know what I mean? Like, Oscar put in the work for these fight scenes. And like, this was good, but this is Marvel. It's supposed to be next level. This is the first like kind of time we're supposed to be seeing like the real fighting prowess of Marc Spector. And it's good. It's fine. But like, I want more.
Disney's got all the money in the world. Why are they not throwing it at decent choreography and making these shots work? Yeah, I'm totally with you. Get these guys in a hallway, give us old school Daredevil Netflix style fight sequences. That would have been and that's what I was expecting heading into it. It is a real bummer that we're not getting that.
Yes. You want to talk about a tale of two screeners, right?
Yeah.
We got the screeners for these, like, right before the premiere. And because there was an expiration date, critics like us all kind of binged the show. And for some people, it worked fine, as the otherwise merciless Joe has pointed out. For Alec and I, it kind of amplified the things that we weren't enjoying as much. I will say that the second viewing of all of these episodes has generally been better. But like, I compare like this, which is supposed to be a spotlight action scene, with when I got the Daredevil season 1 screeners, which also had a time limit on them. And that first hallway fight in episode 2, my screeners almost expired because I kept watching that scene over and over and over again. Like, I could not believe that I was getting a superhero fight that looked like that. Again, this rooftop fight, it's good. It's not great. But the actual Moon Knight fight at the end, like, is barely good. And that is really what bums me out, because this costume is awesome. Like, first of all, it's a great design. I love the way they redesigned it for the show. And, this looks like a video game cinematic to me. Like at no point do I believe that there's, a stuntman, let alone Oscar Isaac, in that costume. It just doesn't work. It just looks way too artificial. And that's a bummer. Like part of the magic of superhero movies and TV for me is seeing how they realize these awesomely designed costumes. I love when they change them from the comics to some degree. I love when they make practical changes. Like I love when they do little things like that. And so far, Moon Knight, I'm just like, this is just a special effect. It's not, it's not somebody doing stuff. And I like seeing people do stuff as a superhero fan,
Yeah, I didn't come up. I think this was somebody said it in our comments last week, but somebody compared his suit to, the Green Lantern suit, which was all CG in the movie. And I'm right there with you. This would have looked so cool, practical. And instead it feels rubbery. And even the shots that we were just looking at, the blocking there, I think is nice. The composition of the scenes work for me, but that dumb looking CG costume in the middle is just so distracting for that very reason. I'm with you there. I still like the show, but I'm with you.
Roger Ebert, in his review for the first Sam Raimi Spider-Man, he ended up giving Spider-Man 2 4 stars, but he didn't like the first one. And he said a lot of it came down to just straight up CGI reasons. Is that it felt like Tobey Maguire was one actor, and then you could get a sense that he would head back to his trailer, and then another actor playing Spider-Man, just like a video game creature, would come on. Yeah. Like it just didn't feel seamless between actor and CGI/stuntman. And Moon Knight definitely is not as bad as the original Raimi Spider-Man in that regard, but I do get it does feel a little disconnected. I think maybe we just need more shots of Oscar Isaac's face in the suit, like we had there briefly in the clip we were watching. But otherwise, it just you can almost get the sense of Oscar Isaac walking off set, and then a computer creation or a stuntman wandering on.
They need to do the Tony Stark thing of
it goes a long way. Just every time the helmet comes off.
Yeah. Which Marvel loves having their heroes or their actors pull their masks off, no secret identities. So I don't know why they're hiding Oscar Isaac's pretty face from us. I'm with you there.
Speaking of helmets coming off, Marc Spector becomes the first Marvel leading man in a while to wear the blue anonymous hat, but it actually has a logo on it. So that's another request for the audience, just like last week's F-bomb. What is that logo that Marc Spector is wearing this time around?
I wasn't aware that blue anonymous hat was a trope. Is this something I should be aware of, Alec?
Oh, absolutely. In every single Captain America movie, maybe not Avengers, I would venture that no fewer than 6 characters throughout Marvel's 27 plus movies, there is a leading male character who puts on a blue hat when he wants to be anonymous. Just a nondescript blue hat, no logo, no anything. And then Mark didn't get the memo because he puts on the blue hat when he's trying to get through Egypt, but it has a logo on it. It's too descript. You're supposed to be nondescript.
Yeah. Now I'm super curious, and I wonder if there's an Easter egg that we missed here. Look, I know I've been especially harsh, not as harsh as Joe, because Green Lantern, bro, really?
He's got Green Lantern in the room, and then in the same breath, he's like, "I love this show."
Yeah, are you the Green Lantern
contain multitudes, man? I don't know what to tell you.
Alec, you might not get this reference, but I know Joe will. The Green Lantern costume looked like Slim Goodbody, you know what I mean? Yeah. Alec is too young. If any Slim Goodbody stands, drop us a line. But Alec, look it up after the show. Look up Slim Goodbody and never sleep again.
Yeah, exactly. Prepare to be horrified.
This was. You want to know why Gen X is such a disaster? Slim Goodbody is my is my night terror. Anyway, what were we saying?
We're talking about hats for 40 minutes. Everybody's left the live stream. We're just us talking about hats.
You see what happens when Kirsten's not here to keep us on track? Oh, Maron. All right, but look, we've been ragging on this long enough. What I do like is this episode has some atmosphere. Like it is going for something. It's not the atmosphere I expected from this show. Initially I expected something, more along the lines of Daredevil, or maybe something that was going to be eerie and horrific and et cetera, et cetera. Instead, they're really leaning into this high adventure mystic, like Indiana Jones / Mummy, without some of the problematic elements. And I can get behind that. Like, that is a change I can get behind. And I dig it. The score is so effective. The weirdness of like turning back the night sky is, wow, Andrew is on point today with these clips. Holy moly. Like, our producer is just like, is just like 3 steps ahead of me. Like the weirdness of this sequence is really in keeping with how Egyptian religion is so abstract in the way it represents the universe. So I really dug this stuff, even if I found some of the other elements like a little harder to swallow, but it's cool. And I just kind of, every time I find myself enjoying something, it's over too fast and it's not explained well enough. But is this working for anybody else, or am I the only one?
No, there's definitely a level of specificity that Mohammed Daib is bringing to the Egyptian stuff that I really appreciate. I mean, the way that the assailants are costumed in the fight scene, those that struck me as very. I mean, I've never been to Cairo, so I might be totally wrong here, but that's something I'm going to see walking down the street. Or I really love the little moment where they're in the boat. Layla and Mark are in the boat, and the group next to them starts doing, there you go, that one. It's just, and they stop and they show us this moment of something that I've never seen, and I'm guessing is very specific to Egyptian culture. And there's a real pride that Daib has in. He's talked about this elsewhere, a pride that he has in Egyptian culture and getting to share it via the TV show. And so those little moments I think are wonderful. That's something that you don't see in the other Marvel movies or properties. And I really appreciate those, as well as the out there stuff that you're mentioning too, that make it stand out.
Yeah, you're right, Joe. Like, specificity is always appreciated. And there are elements like what Mike was talking about with the end and turning back the night sky that's pretty cool. I mean, like, visually and conceptually. I will say a nice thing that's really working for me now is that Khonshu himself has kind of grown on me ever since I got over the my shock of having Optimus Prime just talk to one of the lead characters. I do like that they are incorporating lunar elements. It's Moon Knight, he's the moon god. He's like, how do we gather together all of our god friends for a powwow? And his answer is like, I'm just gonna turn the moon off or bring the moon out. So elements like that do go a long way, and I do think it's pretty cool. I welcome them.
Well, and we do get into Arthur Harrow's past relationship with Khonshu in that kind of semi-trial scene that they have, which I think is really neat. And as we suspected, Arthur all but admits that he got a taste for something in his time as Khonshu's avatar, and he's like, well, you showed me like what's possible, and now I'm going to go out and make it happen. But once again, this scene is undercut by nobody telling Oscar Isaac no. I
like what they're what they're hinting to us about Khonshu. We get that weird kind of one-off line where he's like, it says, sadly, I remember every night, and there's another dimension of Khonshu that we're getting here other than just grouchy jerk. And especially this idea that he's kind of an outcast with the other gods, I think is really compelling. I am kind of leaning towards Alex's concern, though, that there's too much going on here, that now in episode 3, we're going to introduce backstory about our deity, and his tragic backstory. That might be a little bit too much, but yeah, I like what they're doing with the gods there, and hope that we get enough there, and when we can move on to other things. But I don't know that we necessarily need more than the little taste we have here.
You know what this show is pretty good about, and when it comes to Khonshu, and this is the thing that a lot of Marvel properties are good about, is that they ask interesting moral questions.
Mhm.
I don't know if I necessarily have the confidence that that will follow through to an interesting, moral conclusion or answer. I won't judge it yet because we haven't gone through. I just have my suspicions, but it is bold to ask the question of that the gods ask of Khonshu is that like isn't the avatar you've chosen pretty exploitative? Um, like Mark and Steven, the mere fact that they are Mark and Steven means that they're probably not well. Like they're not all together. It might not be the best move to choose a mind that is already fractured in two in some places. So that's a good, fascinating question for a show to watch about, for a show to present about a character and a god that is supposedly on the side of the angels, as it were. I'm not 100% certain that it will lead to the answer I want it to be, which would be yes, it is exploitative. Please let him go. Choose somebody else. But we shall see.
And then, that bit under the pyramid there leads to the next phase of the quest. And, again, there is kind of like two episodes of story in this episode. And you're right, neither of them are served particularly well by the time constraints. But Mark then has to go and find this sarcophagus in order to piece together the next element of the quest. And that leads him to a friend of Layla's named Anton Margot, who comic book fans may know as a character called the Midnight Man. And, he's played here by the late Gaspard Ulliel, who unfortunately passed in a tragic accident like weeks before Moon Knight premiered. So it's a very different take on the character. Like there's elements of the comics character here. He's kind of like a gentleman thief, like almost in like kind of like the Phantomas mold in the comics, right? And we see that here. And he's obviously got history with Layla, and they mention, an incident in Madripoor, which is the second time that show has been mentioned, on these Marvel shows. But it's another thing that's just kind of introduced and serves a purpose for Mark and Steven to get a piece of what they need, and then kind of shuffled off to the side. How did you fellas feel about this?
I mean, I'm probably like you. Anytime you're going to mention Madripoor, I'm going to get a little excited. You just mention that he got served by a bartender named Patch, and I'll be over the moon excited. But as far as the way it played out there, I thought it was fine. I mean, I would have liked to see him in the Midnight Man costume, like we saw there in the shot there before. It's like Moon Knight's, but all black, and I'd like to see that visualized, hopefully as actual cloth on an actual person instead of CG stuff. But as far as it actually worked there, in the show, it was fine. I thought my French is poor. I'm so sorry. Ulliel was engaging, but not terribly remarkable. I think it did the job and set up the next fight sequence, and it felt a little perfunctory, I guess.
Really not a fan of kind of the side quest nature of this, like at episode's beginning. I mean, Arthur Harrow is basically where he needs to be. They found Amit's tomb fairly early in the series. And that just feels like kind of poor logistical plot planning, because like if Arthur can get there so quickly, why do we have to indulge kind of a side quest now? Steven and Mark and Layla and Moon Knight need to go to this sarcophagus because the plot tells them they need to go. You could devise a plot that just as easily takes them directly to Amit's tomb, but they didn't, probably because just sheer logistics and timing. So I found that kind of relatively boring for that reason. It's another one of those instances where like 6 episodes is both a lot and a little. 6 episodes is probably too much for them to really get down into like the nitty gritty of the plot quickly, like, keeps Steven and Mark from Amit's tomb at the same time. But it's also, not that much to my prior complaint that, the endings of these episodes could really be hitting harder. Yeah. My point being, the side quest nature of it all kind of grated me a bit.
One thing that scene does have, though, is one of the episode's few genuine Easter eggs. While Anton is never referred to as Midnight in the episode, and obviously he doesn't wear the costume or even the colors of the costume, as he rides off, and all we know is that he gets hit with one of those moon daggers as he's riding off into the fog there. If you listen, you will hear 12 chimes striking from a clock, and in the background, the hands on a clock tower are set at midnight. So that's kind of cool. I appreciate like subtle nods like that. I understand why introducing a character with a full face mask and a jaunty opera cape and everything might not fit with the sensibilities of the MCU at the moment, particularly with the vibe that they're aiming for with this show. But yet again, it does feel a little bit like this could have been any character, and they just wanted to, nod to this. On the other hand, had this actor not, been tragically taken from everybody so soon, perhaps they were setting him up as, a future rival for future seasons, like a rival for Layla's affections, perhaps, an anti-hero, because we know how much the MCU loves sanding the edges off their villains and turning them into pals. So, I can't really tell how much of this was perhaps done by necessity, and Den of Geek contributor Don Kay did speak to Mohammed Diab about, working with Gaspard Ulliel, and and the director had some wonderful things to say about him. He said, Gaspard did such a great job that I felt like he was going to get called back one day by Marvel. It's such a loss. I can't even believe that we're talking about him in past tense, because he was full of life. He was beautiful as a person. And the only positive thing from everything that's happened is that he's going to live through his films as a legend forever. So, that is very sad. And you can see the tremendous charisma that this actor had, and I wish they would have had more time to develop the character and see where he could have taken him in the MCU.
Yeah, that's Moon Knight's got a weird supporting cast, so it is Midnight Man is kind of set up in Doug Mensch's run as the counter, but doesn't really get picked up by other actors. By other writers. He has so many sort of one-off, or not one-off, but one writer off, I'll say, side characters. So while it's disappointing that they're not going to do that much with this character, there are still plenty of other equally unseen or usable characters in the canon that I hope will make it the way to Scream one way or another.
Yes. And look, we've seen time and time again in the MCU, the characters like that are often the best for reinvention and broader development on screen. And, Layla is a perfect example of that, like right here on this show. So, it's not like, look, we talk a lot on these episodes of Marvel Standom about the changes that are made from the comics. But in the case of Moon Knight, it's not that all of these changes are necessarily bad. And generally speaking, when Marvel Studios makes changes from Marvel Comics, they do serve the story, and they do serve the purpose of making these characters, first of all, more modern, and and getting rid of sort of problematic elements, et cetera, and so on down the line. But they also make them, they often dust off characters that you wouldn't have thought twice about. Mm-hmm. and make them much more interesting. So, like, I do embrace the changes that they're bringing to this character, even if there's quite a few of them that I don't particularly care for myself. Any final thoughts before we close this episode out?
No, I just
still like the show.
Look at that hat. I gotta figure out what's on that hat.
That is it for this week's Marvel Standom. We will be back again next Wednesday. We're back on Wednesdays, folks, to break down Moon Knight episode 4 and unpack all the other happenings in the MCU. Make sure you're subscribing to us wherever you're watching or listening right now. Don't forget to check out our web home of denofgeek.com, where you can find all our Marvel and Moon Knight coverage. Go to denofgeek.com/Marvel for that. Drop us a line. Let us know your burning questions and what you want us to cover in upcoming episodes. We are at Marvel Standom on Twitter and Instagram. Please give those a follow, because we'll have some surprises there too one of these days. If you came in late, you'll be able to watch this entire episode on denofgeek.com or at our YouTube home, Den of Geek. We are Den of Geek US on YouTube. And don't forget, you can check out past episodes there and wherever you get your podcasts. I just want to thank Merciless Joe George for joining us once again this week. You can read Joe's writing on Den of Geek. And where else can they find you, George?
Oh, just all over. So my Twitter handle is right there at JAGeorgeII. I'm posting regular stuff and trying to be nice about superheroes. But if you're mad about me talking about Moon Knight, that's the place to yell at me.
Thank you to our producer, Andrew Halley, for making us all look good this week and every week, and for being really on it this week, bro. My God. Don't worry, everybody. Kirsten Howard will be back next week as well. Thank you to Lee Parham, our social media coordinator, for working in the comments for us, for promoting the show, and also making us look good, and for putting up with me every day. Good Lord. And I think that's it. We will see you next Wednesday. This has been DC Standom on the Den of Geek Network. Until next time, remember, folks. Oh, did I say? Woo! Well, we'll fix it in post. This has been Marvel Standom on the Den of Geek Network. Until next time, remember, folks, we stand together.
I did not hit her. It's not true. It's bullshit. I did not hit her. I did not. Oh, hi, Mark. Oh, shit.